A very good morning to all the participants who have been listening to the Lifespan Development course, the core subject in BA Psychology. We have been discussing on different aspects of lifespan development, the different phases of lifespan development, and theories concerned with the lifespan development. Today, we'll be dealing to a certain extent with the childhood and puberty stages of lifespan development. According to Havinghurst, there are about 6 stages of childhood where each is demarcated by special tasks called as developmental tasks. Havinghurst defines the human life as being characterized by about 6 stages of growth, that is infancy and early childhood from birth to 6 years of age, middle childhood from 6 to 12 years of age, and adolescence, which ranges from 13 to 18 years, and early adulthood, which ranges from 19 years to 30 years, and middle age, which is characterized from 30 years to 60 years, and late maturity, which is realized after 60 years and above. We'll be talking about the childhood and its characteristics and how the childhood is divided into different stages of childhood, that is the early childhood, the middle or late childhood, and how these 3 stages of childhood have their own characteristic features. If we consider the infancy and childhood, which we have dealt in detail in the previous classes, we can talk about now the early childhood. From learning to actually walk, that stage is seen in the toddlerhood stage, which is before 2 years. An infant tries to develop the skill of walking and also utters a few words. But it is in the early childhood, that is from 2 years to 6 to 7 years, which is a playful age, the child tries to explore the environment around and he tries to get interaction with various people as well as different sorts of environment, and he develops his sensory skills and tries to interact with people. So here we understand that the early childhood, he develops the skills to communicate step by step. We find that the growth is somewhat more developed. There is quicker development of the child, and the child forms the adult language, takes an interest in the outside world, but only in terms of concrete participation. It is from his side, from his ego side, egoistical side, he tries to interact to fulfill his needs with the society. After the early childhood comes the middle childhood, which is the school-going age generally, which is from 6 years to further change, from further 6 to around 11 to 12 years, where we find that the child becomes more interactive. He is also more troublesome, more quarrelsome as he tries to realize his efforts in the world. And here we find the children trying to develop into gangs and also try to conform to the societal rules. The age of conformity is seen, and also age of creativity is seen, but still we find that they try to associate in groups, form gangs, and try to develop association with similar sort of peers who have tried to accommodate them. And we find that the child, if he's not actually accepted into a group, he finds himself very miserable. So this stage in the middle childhood, where he tries to adjust to the environment, becomes more interactive, is known as the middle childhood. Then comes the later childhood, where thinking becomes more flexible, and also he is able to relate to objects and he classifies them, and he forms the groups, but he associates with people who try to interact with him on a reciprocal basis, as well as he forms association with people with whom he finds the social interactions much happier. So Havinghurst talks about these developmental tasks, that is the tasks which are assigned to a particular age group, which actually help the individual to conform with society. At the same time, it gives an idea to the teachers to actually what to expect of a child and what are the hurdles that can be seen in a particular stage. Further, this also gives an indication to the parents as well as the teacher of what to expect of the child in the future times or in the future times which are to come ahead. So we find that from the infancy stage, from the ages of 6 to 12, we find that the children are more, they have more propensity for playing games. They are more creative and imaginative. They get along with people of their own age, and they are also are able to understand their roles, that is whether they are feminine or masculine, and they get the concepts of everyday living. They are also able to develop the concepts of values, and they also try to achieve independence gradually. But after the age of 12 to 18, now they try to develop relations with other people. They try to get along with the opposite sex, and also they are able to understand their own physics and their own body, and well as they try to get emotionally independent of their parents. So this is a stage where they are getting prepared for marriage and family life. So at the age of 12 to 18, they have their own set of values. They develop an ethical system which guides them in their behavior. So we find the gradual development of the child during the different stages of early, middle, and later childhood. Now we find that the physical development of the childhood is also forms. It takes a gradual step by step. For example, when we consider the early childhood aspect, we find that the physical development is somewhat faster. It is not as faster as an infant. In the 1 to 2 years, what we see so much faster, it is not seen in the later stages. But still, we see that it is slow, but it also tries to take into cognizance the various aspects of the social and other development. The body increases, there is growth, but it is not so rapid as in infancy or as in adolescence, but there is gradual spread of growth. So here we find the normal principles of development as we have read or heard earlier, that is the cephalopodal development. As soon as a child is born, we see in younger babies that the head is somewhat heavier than the body. And also the middle part, that is the trunk, is somewhat compact and heavier than the rest of the body. But when the child tries to grow, we find that the head becomes smaller and becomes proportionate with other body organs. For example, we find that a child who is very small will have his brain is somewhat bigger, but it grows at the rate of say 1/6 by the age he reaches 6 years, and about 1/18 when he reaches around 18 years or so. So gradually the skull, the head change size gradually becomes smaller, that is in proportion to the whole body. And also, as we were talking about the cephalopodal principle, that is the body, the head actually grows first bigger, and then the caudal, the legs start growing. So therefore, after a certain time, we find that the legs are growing more. So the ability to stand, crawl, and walk all come into action because there is growth of the caudal regions. And also the proximo-distal development, that is from the trunk, the body starts growing outside. And therefore, as we were speaking earlier, as we were talking and discussing, the hands actually, the arms develop before the hands, and these hands and the foot also develop before fingers and toes. So we also find the hierarchical integration, that is all the simple skills which are developed, they combine into forming what we call more complex skills. Also, there is independence of systems, the body size, nervous system, sexual characteristics, all develop individually. We also find that there are changes in body, brain size, as I said, which was originally about 1/3 of the body weight. It starts by the 10 years, it becomes 1/18 of the body size, as well as 1/40 of the body weight by the time the boy or child reaches maturity. We also find that the lymphoid tissue also starts growing in the body. Lymphoid tissue is found to help in the resistance of the body. That is, the lymphoid tissue is an additional vascular system found in the body, which is connected to all the lymph glands, which produce substances which they give immunity to the body. They provide the lymphocytes. And also we find that the skeletal system goes on increasing in the body. We find increase in bone structure, muscle structure, which gives the boy the height or proportion, or what you call the increase in the size or the bone size, as well as increase in the leg size, etc. Now, the change in body proportions means the head and trunk are somewhat relatively disproportionate when the child is born. But later, we find that their legs grow more rapidly than the trunk during childhood. We also find that the child develops increase in height. He becomes more height. When the child is born, he is between 17 to 21 inches. But later, we find that at 8 months, he grows about 24 inches and say is about 26 to 28 inches by the time he becomes 8 months, and after 1 year, he reaches from 28 to 30 inches. By the time the boy or the child is about 2 years old, the child height would be somewhere between 32 to 34 inches. So we see that the gender also has some role in the height, but generally girls tend to grow initially, they gain more height, but the boys try to develop more height during the adolescence. We find that the changes in body weight also occur differently during the childhood. We find the newborn baby is around 8 pounds. 1 pound is roughly around 0.45 kgs. So here the child gains weight over a period of time. And by the time the child does his weight, when he is about 4 years old, but then we find it takes more time to increase gain in height than in weight. So we find that the jaws, the teeth also start forming. And by the time the baby is 9 months old, they have around 2 to 3 teeth. But around 6 years, they have the permanent teeth coming instead of the milk teeth. The milk teeth start dropping away. And the child has around 1 to 2 permanent teeth during when he is 6 years old. And 10 to 11 teeth when they are about aged 8 years. And 14 to 16 teeth by the time when they are 10 years. And 24 to 26 teeth by 12 years. And around 28 teeth by the age of 13 years. And gradually these teeth stop growing. And by the time the last teeth are formed, the last teeth are formed by the age of 25 years. So we have got the increasingly the incisors, molars, canines, precanines all being formed. And generally the permanent teeth are completely formed by the age when they are 25. That is, the wisdom teeth or the last 4 teeth are formed by the age when they are 25. So we find the increase in body proportions, the increase in height and weight. Of course, they're also dependent on several other factors. But then we also find as the child grows that there are differences in how they sleep, eat, or they eliminate waste. For example, consider the sleep patterns. A child sleeps most during the day, but gradually we find the tendency is to sleep during the night. Similarly, the habits of sucking or just sipping, they give changes to with the arrival of teeth. The child is now able to take on to semi-solid or solid food. Now, these patterns are also seen somewhat variantly, but generally these are the general trends. And also we find that elimination of waste or the bowel movement and the control of urinary bladder also come appropriately when the child starts growing, and how they develop these habits of controlling the bowel or the bladder movement. These help the child to quickly understand, quickly regulate itself. And once the control of the bladder movements is there, it occurs, the child is now ready to go to school and start learning. So this gives an indication generally to parents as well as the medical experts about how the child is growing, and also the parenting of inculcating in the children the bowel movements or control of bladder or trying to regulate all these sort of experiences help the child to gain confidence on its own physiological functions and try to adjust to the environment. Now, along with the physical changes and physiological changes, where the child tries to get control of its own body as well as getting in trying to interact with the social environment in its surroundings, we also find that the stages of social development also occur. We know that the mother is the first social person who responds to the child. So we also see different stages of social development. That is, a child initially is able to talk to its mother as well as catch its eyes, and whenever there is a need for it, for food or anything, and smiles when it is its needs are fulfilled. So from these stages of initial social development, the child starts developing other skills. Like suppose a child is left alone, it starts crying. Now, this indicates that the child is able to gratify its needs by understanding that its requirements are filled when it tries to give a social cue. That is, when it cries, the mother is able to come back. So it also tries to mimic the adult sounds, and gradually it takes interest in adult activities. Say from the early childhood, that is from 2 to 6 years, we find that gradually the cognitive as well as language abilities start developing. And we see here that the child displays the tendency to show its need for companionship. It requires people around it, as well as it tries to play and have fun. So gradually, the ability to give out small words and communicate, this also helps the child to socialize to a certain extent. So in early childhood, say by the age of 2nd or 3rd year, we find that the child is able to interact with play. It also tries to play with itself or with others. But by the 3rd year, it also shows the pro-social behavior, like trying to interact with other people and helping others, as well as trying to show certain features like dominance types of behavior are shown by some children, where they try to be a little aggressive, they tend to quarrel, tease, etc. It depends on the environment in which they are growing and how they share the social stimuli with its parents or siblings. So children also start sharing meanings with each other, and they assign imaginary roles. That is, they start role playing. They give some roles to the toys with which they are playing, and they try to talk to it. So we find them imaginative as well as trying to develop the playful attitude. That is, as we were speaking earlier, they are trying to develop the animistic. Even the toys are assigned with human-like roles, and the toys are spoken to, the toys are taken care of, etc. So with all these succession of encounters, we also see that the toddlers will start developing the reciprocal relations. For example, they also start interacting with other children, and they try to speak to others and develop their actions based on the reaction from their counterparts or the other children. So here, later stage, gradually with experiences, the children from the role playing or the imaginative role play start interacting with other children, as well as they develop true friendships after a certain time. During the preschool years, that is before the child starts going to school, say at the age of 3, 4, 5 years, we find that the social dominance hierarchies are seen. We find that the more dominant children are able to win in conflicts with other children, whereas the less dominant children tend to be losers. So we find some children are becoming aggressive, whereas some children, they tend to be less aggressive. So the children's opportunities for social participation are governed by their parents. For example, the sort of interactions or the influence the parents have on their children at this age is very high, and it's very immeasurable, because in the sense, the children's local environment helps in forming of their social skills as well as social aggression or social losing out. So here we find the formation of peer relationships is later formed because of this first initial formed social interaction. From the age of middle to late childhood, that is from 6 to 12 years, we find that the children show the tendency to go in groups. This is known as the gang age, where they try to form gangs. Here, they, instead of the parental control, where they have subjected to a limited number of people, here we find that the children are able to go out into diverse playgrounds. That is, they either have the school or they go to play in their immediate neighborhood, and therefore we see that they are interacting with many people and many children in many diverse locations, and this gives them scope to form various relationships. And that is how at this stage they find that the parents are no longer able to control them to as much as they wish, and here the children go out, they play in the playgrounds, they play in the neighborhoods, they play in the school, and they develop a relationship with various peers, and here the loyalty is the first thing that is formed, as well as the gangs start forming. Here we find that the friendship comes important to play an important role, and we find that the middle and late childhood, we find that later that the verbal aggression takes place of the physical aggression. That is, initially they may show physical aggressive behavior, but later they also know that verbal aggression has a role that they can affect others by their words. So children, when they grow up in games with a definite role. So they learn role playing. With games, they learn social interactions and social, what we call high and lows, as well as the aggressive, dominant, as well as the soft behavior. So all these are learned through play by the children in late adulthood. We also find that the children's social development also is seen in different stages in different ways. For example, at the age of, say, initially, the social behavior is only to get their needs filled. So when it smiles or when it interacts, it is only to get their physical needs filled. But by the age of 3 years, children start playing cooperatively with others and with their peers. But by the age of 4 years, they start associative playing, and they also, we find conflicts developing among children by the time they reach 4 years. At the age of 6 years, we find that they are involved in a variety of settings, and therefore they are less under the control of the adults. So the goal of friendship is seen only when they have shared interests. When they find common interests with other children, they will start developing friendship with those children. And they also see that the games are continued so that they become successful in them, and they try to maintain a successful, playful roles. And the age of 7 to 9, they also try to get the acceptance of peers. So social acceptance or getting accepted by their friends is one of the features seen at the age of 7 to 9 years. So from 9 to 12 years, we find that here the people are more concerned with sharing things. They want to share secrets, and they also find people, if they find good enough, they start disclosing about their own self. So here, from the stages of getting their initial gratification to the stage where they are able to form associations and also share their feelings of where they form trust and loyalty, as well as developing some sort of self-disclosure about their own self, are the gradual milestones through which how the social development occurs. So the child is increasingly is able to interact with its social environment and is able to form the social self, where he is able to deal with others with confidence and also react with others and form social interactions with other children. So by the end of the late childhood, the child is able to interact and form good social relationships with others who may be either parents or the outside strangers or friends or peers. So this is the gradual unfolding of the social self. Now, personality development is also seen. Now, personality is that features by which others try to associate you with certain traits like temperaments or what we call phases or states. A state is a condition through a time period through which you exhibit a particular type of behavior. So traits and states are things. So for example, a person is moody, we say he's in a moody state. Somewhat he's in a happy, we say he's in exhilarant, exuberant state. Now these states are also dependent on the what we call the personality, how a child tries to deal with its immediate circumstances. It becomes a characteristic feature of one's own being. Now, these personality traits are also result from how the child is exposed to whatever circumstances or social situations from one's early childhood. Now, we see that a combination of psychosocial as well as parental as well as biological conditions which actually try to form a child's personality. We know that the family relationships, how a family fares, how the parents treat the children, what sort of interactions the siblings have, how the family interacts, how much time they spare with each other, and how the family treats its members, all these have a role on the development of the child. We find that many factors of the family, for example, the parenting techniques, whether a parent is strictly disciplinarian or whether he is too lenient, these sort of attitudes too have a bearing on the child's development, that is personality. Sometimes some parents are completely, they feel by sort of discipline, they try to be harder on their children, while some parents by way of being lenient, they try to be having less discipline, and these conditions also have a bearing on the child rearing. The family's health, if one of the family members is affected, they have ill health, it also has a bearing on the children's growth. We find that many factors like these, like families' economic well-being, as well as families, one of the parents, whether they are healthy or not, both of them are healthy or not, as well as the family circumstances, and well as the families, what you call the parents' traits or habits like alcoholism or other conditions, or being socially well-equipped, or having social good relationships with other people around them. All these have a bearing on the child's development. We know that also the preschoolers, that is before going school, that is in younger stages of the childhood, we find that the children are also susceptible to their siblings' influence. That is their siblings who may be either somewhat bigger than them or smaller than them. Especially from the bigger siblings, the children tend to learn something from their behavior. Also we see that during the later stage, from 2 to 6 years, we find that children gradually understand that they are separate from their parents and they start becoming independent. So generally, we see that the child, after he starts going to school, he becomes more independent, he develops more autonomy or self-direction, and also as well as they will try to start doing things on their own, that is their own initiative. We find that Ericsson has given us certain stages of development. He talks about these stages from birth to 11 years. We have classified under 4 stages. So here we find that according to these stages, all this development occurs on the personality. The healthy personality means being able to deal with the circumstances in a healthy way, whereas if a child is not able to adjust to its circumstances, it may result in a sort of a sense of failure in the child, which may also affect its further development. That is, we find that having her talks about the developmental tasks, that is the task assigned during the development of a particular stage, which are somewhat similar to the what we call the Ericsson's psychosocial development theory. It is somewhat parallel. Having Hurst only talks about the developmental tasks which are associated with Ericsson's developmental theories, except Ericsson talks about certain characters that are being developed during these stages, whereas the Having Hurst talks about the developmental tasks, that is, what tasks a child should accomplish during a particular stage. Society expects certain things to be done. For example, society may consider the child to be doing certain things and being disciplined, whereas middle age, they expect them to be, childhood, they expect them to be somewhat more creative, or more on the taking more initiative. So these different stages, as expected by society, if the child is able to perform, the child gets appreciated, and this appreciation makes the child to gradually, successfully to embrace with the role of the next stage. That is, if a child finds itself happy, it tries to go for the next stage and is able to perform the developmental tasks associated. So every stage is associated with certain tasks, which if carried out successfully, makes that person go for the next stage with happiness, and therefore he's able to pass on the stages of different stages of lifespan, that is from childhood to adulthood, successfully. So success at one stage breeds success at the other stage. But how does the child achieve success or developmental task at one stage? It is only with the support of the parents as well as the teachers. So every level requires the task to be completed, and if they are completed successfully, the child is able to gain appreciation as well as develop self-confidence and also understand the role, its own role, and therefore is able to pass on to the next stage of development without any hitches. And this helps in the growth of a healthy individual. That is why the parents or teachers should understand what are the tasks that are assigned, should be empathetic to the child's problems, and should be able to understand their limitations as well as help them to pass on from one stage to another with confidence. Now, coming to the Ericsson's theory of social development, psychosocial development, we talk about the impact of the external factors, that is parents on society, on the growth of the child. We know that the completion of one stage leads to healthy personality, and failure to one stage to another leads to somewhat dissatisfaction in the child, and therefore that all these development stages influence each other. We talk about from birth to 1 year, where the sense of trust versus mistrust develops in the child. If the child is somewhat appreciated, coddled, met lovingly and consistently, then the child develops what we call a sort of healthy relationship with his mother, and thinks that the world is a safe place and is able to get along with the world. So the trust starts from the parents or the mother initially, trust versus mistrust. Otherwise, if it is not able to believe that it is not safe, then it is no longer happy with the environment, and therefore mistrusting the world starts. This stage may occur between 0 to 3 years or birth to 1 year. Autonomy versus shame or doubt. From 1 to 3 years, we find that the child tries to do something on its own and it's appreciated, its independence is appreciated. It tries to develop its own self-morale or self-autonomy, and it starts doing things on the own. But if it is curtailed or it is shamed, it starts doubting itself, and this sort of doubt persists throughout life sometimes. So this is a stage where we find independence behavior being exhibited for the child, and this phase, it helps, if it is successful, it helps in instilling self-confidence in the child. The next stage from 3 to 5 years is initiative versus guilt. The child tries to take certain initiative, and it tries to see certain environmental challenges and tries to meet them. And if it accepts the challenges and meets them, and if it is successful and is appreciated, it starts taking initiative in certain other aspects also. So here, the independence to explore things and to knowledge, if it is appreciated, it will result in a confidence. Whereas if the child is restricted, it is asked not to move out, and is also any initiative is curtailed or stopped, if the guilt starts, the feeling of guilt, maybe it feels, maybe I should not do this, it starts doubting itself. So this sort of initiative versus guilt, me feeling it is doing something wrong, these characters also persist lifelong. That is why we say that the childhood is the initial stage where the adult is groomed, or where its personality characteristics are formed. The next stage is from 6 to 11 years, where we find the fourth stage of Ericsson, he talks about is industry versus inferiority. The child does something, it puts in its effort, and if it is appreciated, it tries to repeat the task. Whereas if it is somewhat scolded or reprimanded, it doubts its own competence. So here we find industry, if rewarded, will result in the same sort of behavior. And if it is curtailed, it will result in the what you call stopping taking the initiative. So the Ericsson talks about these 4 stages, that is birth to for 1 year, that is we call it as trust versus mistrust, mistrusting the world. And the second is 1 to 3 years, where the child shows autonomy, and if it is agreed upon, it is encouraged upon, it develops autonomy, versus shame or doubt on itself. The third is from the 3 to 5 years, where there is seen a stage where the child can develop either initiative or start developing the feelings of guilt. And the fourth stage is from industry versus inferiority, where the children's industriousness or hard work is appreciated, or it may be not be appreciated. So encouraging the child when it does something good, or reprimanding the child when it does something wrong, are the initial characteristics which show the involvement of the parents or the teachers with the children, and therefore is a milestone in forming the children's development. Also, we find that along with the physical growth and the physiological growth, along the social growth, we also see the development of the emotions. See, what are emotions? Emotions are reactions to environment. And how are they characterized? How are emotions formed? If emotions are formed, we find we have either negative or positive emotions. The positive emotions are happiness, being happy about something, having pleasurable emotions, having pleasurable moments, and finding peace, happiness, security. These sort of things are emotional pluses, whereas their emotional minuses or negative feelings or unpleasant feelings also. And these feelings of feeling happy or unhappy, feeling good or bad, these sort of things happen because we find some factor in the environment which is causing. And of course, again, due to emotions, we also exhibit some behaviors. There is also some sort of reaction. So we can say that the emotions are subjective to environment. The emotions either are pleasant or unpleasant, and this is accompanied some sort of physiological arousal sometimes. For example, if you feel pleasant enough, you're happy and you smile, so a physiological response is seen. Sometimes you're unhappy and you start crying, and therefore the physiological response is also seen. So it is exhibited in some sort of a behavior also, and it is communicated to others. Now we see that the child initially, it starts also developing these emotions, and these emotions are developed based on its interactions with the family members. And also these emotions are subject to the environment and are also genetical to a certain extent. Some people exhibit violent behavior or somewhat moody behavior. Sometimes they are also genetic predisposition to emotions, but mostly they are learned from the environment. During childhood, we find that as soon as the children's social skills develop, the emotionality is also conditioned by these such skills. And we see that the emotionality develops because of the cognitive skill. Understanding of the circumstances, understanding of others' emotions is also a cognitive skill. That is, understanding helps in developing the emotional aspect. Now, emotions are experienced, emotions are exhibited, and emotions are processed. So there are several stages of how an emotion is formed, but then we find that responses occur because exposure to someone else's emotional state also brings a sort of emotional conditioning in us, because we have certain neurons which helps us to copy others' emotions. Now, when somebody is happy, we also tend to be happy. That is known as vicarious emotional responding. Somebody is violent, and therefore we also try to develop the feelings of violence. Therefore, this is known as the vicarious emotional responding. Now, vicarious means not direct, but indirectly you are able to experience something vicarious. Now, here, this sort of vicarious emotional response on behalf of others, this is important because during these stages of childhood, if a child is exposed to violent circumstances or movies which have the violent component or criminal content, these sort of things also have a bearing on the children, whereas good things also have a bearing on the children's development. So depending on the early childhood, how it thinks, how it acts, here also are subjected to environment. But the children, generally, they focus initially on their emotions, on their own. In the initial stages, they try to focus on their own needs. And later, we find that they act only in ways which are comforting to them. If the emotions are comforting, they try to rely on them. But when, for example, you consider a 3-year-old child, he tries to now understand not only his own needs of fulfillment of its own things, hunger or thirst. This gives its pleasure and it's happy in the early stages. But in the age of 3 years, the child is able to understand. Suppose it sees its mother's crying. It goes and says, you play with my toy. And it, in ways it finds its own comfort. It also tries to please others. That is, it feels that the other person also finds the same things comfortable as it feels by itself. So here we find that it tries to project its feelings on the others. Now, this is a gradual stage of emotional development. But later we find that the children gradually become aware of other people's feelings. They understand feelings of anger from parents or feelings of sadness from parents. That is, they try to see that the familiar persons at familiar situations, they either if they are seeing the same condition, they try to exhibit the sympathetic or empathetic feelings towards these people. So from its own needs to projecting the feelings on the others, it gradually, the child with its development of, with age or its development, it also tries to what you call extrapolate or try to develop these feelings also to others in the society. Now that is the stage where we find that the child is able to understand in the later stages that the emotions are seen in all people. It is able to understand the emotional states of other people, and it is also known, and its emotions are also what we call extrapolated, or it tries to generalize its feelings or emotions to other persons whom it does not know. That is known as unknown others. So its emotions, gradually knowing one's own emotions as well as others' emotions, and trying to interact with others' emotions, and also seeing how to react to others' emotions and how to exhibit or control its own emotions, understanding the consequences of emotions and how to control emotions and how to give a safe way to these emotions. And that is how the gradual emotional maturity is gained by the child. We have talked about the social development, where the child becomes increasingly tries to develop social relations. We have talked about the moral development, where the child, emotional development, where the child tries to understand the interactions with other people in concepts of its emotions as well as others' emotions. Now also the stages of moral development are also seen during the childhood. We have initially understood the Fallbacks theory of moral development. Fallback actually developed his theory in 1969 at Harvard Center for Moral Education based on the Piaget's theory. Piaget, who has developed his knowledge of cognitive development, his theory of cognitive development, also talks about the moral development to a certain extent. He talks about generally 3 stages: the pre-moral stage, whereas moral realistic stage, or morality stage of morality, as well as in between there is a stage of moral realism. So the pre-moral stage, all these stages, that is pre-moral stage, realistically moral stage or moral realistic stage, as well as the third stage, that is post-moral stage, or where they form the reciprocal feelings of morality. All these 3 stages, he says, they extend from one to another. They're invariant. They do not turn back. There are the continuous stages of morality, development of morality in children. For example, in the pre-moral stage, he talks about the concept of rules. That is, they feel that the rules should be obeyed, like one should listen to one's parents. Whereas we find that the objective responsibility or immanent justice that is prevalent, that all things should be obeyed, is realized later, in later stages, where the children tend to become realists and understand the world. Whereas in the next stage, that is reciprocity or morality, we find that the intentionality of the person has a bearing, whether the person finds that he finds it correct or not, whether he truly believes it or not, or whether there are any logical reasons become important, as well as the social order, the morality can be changed based upon the need of the society. That actually is the later stages of moral development. Kohlberg, who has extended Jean Piaget's theory, has also said that the morality changes as a person matures. For example, there, as Piaget talks about the initial stages of pre-conventional morality, where the events are given importance and where the children does something moral to avoid punishment from its parents. My father may be angry if I play too late. Therefore, the child comes back home. And this is the stage where the right or not wrong is conceived by, not by its own self or its own morality, but it is subjected to circumstances or external influences or parents, etc. So in this pre-conventional morality, the child feels an external other trying to control its own morality. It is subjected to the feelings of reward or punishment. Whereas the conventional morality in the late childhood takes place because he feels everybody in the society does it, so I should also do it. The societal acceptance is a factor at the later stage of morality, because here the child tries to conform to the social rules. The post-conventional morality is a stage where the child abides, that is from adolescence onwards, that is at middle or later childhood, we find this sort of attitude developing, where moral judgments are found to be rational and internalized and by ethical conduct. Here it is not others' approval which matter. Here the child feels that if there is a moral conflict, the ethical good and bad should be decided based on certain principles, and the principle should, if it is not satisfied, if it is not done, the morality acceptable behavior is not followed, it will result in guilt or self-recrimination or condemnation. So the theory of how a child is able to form from the pre-conventional morality, that is where following its parents or society to avoid punishment, to a stage of moral realism, that is where the child feels everybody should be subjected to the same moral rules or moral conduct, to a post-conventional morality stage where it feels everything should be judged on its own basis and the conditions or the circumstances should be taken into consideration while doing a morally acceptable behavior, or there should be a moral code of ethics, or if one does not follow such moral code ethics, he feels guilt, is at the end stage or the post-conventional morality stage. We find this post-moral conventional stage at the age of adolescence and late adolescence. Now, how did the Kohlberg arrived at this sort of thing, theory? If we consider it, he has done several experiments on children aged around 10 to 16 years, where he gave a number of questions, moral dilemmas to these children, and he found them. Sometimes at the earlier stages, there was obedience to rules, and gradually the authority of others' needs and welfare of others were there. And at some stage, there was conflict in the children's minds as to what is a moral conduct that should be followed. For example, there is, suppose, a drug peddler or a new inventor of a drug who has founded medicine for cancer. Now, if that cancer medicine is obtained by all the ingredients can be brought at 200 rupees, and so the medicine is sold at 1,000 or 2,000 rupees. If somebody who is very poor wants to obtain this medicine for his own purpose or for his child or someone or his wife, he approaches this person who manufactures the medicine and asks him to sell it for rupees 1,000 because he doesn't have much, 2,000 rupees, which the medicine costs. If the person who sells the medicine doesn't say, says no, then if the person who is in need of it tries to steal the drug, is it okay? Is it correct or not? These sort of questions are posed to the children. And the justifications, what sort of justifications, or the dilemma is whether one should actually steal the drug to cure one's own wife, or to actually not cure and let his own wife die. These sort of moral dilemmas are presented from the age of, to the children from the age of 10 to 16, and how they justified what they said. Based on this, the judgments or what sort of justifications they have given, he tried to see what sort of moral development the children were, what phase they were in the stages of moral development. And Kohlberg also says that people justify or have the same answer, but the sort of justification they give at different ages also vary. For example, one may feel in the initials, I'll do what I'll do because that is, I have to do is this in order to avoid punishment. But at a later stage, he may say, I have to do what others do, or I will do what I'm supposed to do as, because the things will become better if everybody follows the rules. So he may do the same thing, but the justification given will vary actually. And also at the later stages, he may say, I will do what I think is the right to do because it is the right thing to do and it is socially acceptable. So justifications may vary, but depending on the emotional maturity of the children, the sort of light they throw on the moral development of the children also varies. So from immediate avoidance of punishment to actual acceptance of rules, that is rule following, to actually understanding the particular rule position in the society and trying to take on an action based on the moral grounds, which will actually help the society and which is dependent on ethical principle and not on others' approval as such, but trying to justify certain things based on one's own position is how gradually the moral development occurs in the children. We find that there are several hazards for children in the society. A child, to be a healthy child, should be able to develop proper morals, proper social skills, and also proper physical and physiological growth, and also develop cognitive abilities. So a child requires support from its parents as well as its superiors or its friends. I would not say friends, but then from its parents and relatives and also neighbors and other significant others who are elder to it in sort of providing it with a supportive environment as well as a safe environment. We find that illnesses of parents or mortality, sometimes the children's parents or grandparents may die, which may result in somewhat an emotional blackout to the children, or sometimes accidents happen. There is also these sort of things actually try to impact the children's growth. Now, therefore, these sort of hazards mostly may be physical sometimes they may be emotional, and these will create disturbances in the children's mind. And a healthy childhood is very necessary, and healthy childhood requires support and guidance from parents. And we find that the emotional hazards also may be dominant, but being exposed to much anger or violence can also cause problems. There are also moral hazards that are seen, and we find some parents mistreat their children, and that by being more, if their children are disobedient, they try to punish them, or sometimes the parents try to provide a leeway to their children, or they become very lenient with the children, also causing problems to the children as well as to society. So how you punish your children, what sort of rewards you give children is also important. The thing is, if the punishment is not given, if the children does wrong, or if they're not reprimanded, or if they're not scolded, if they do a wrong thing, and if they are not given rewards, if they do a good thing, both of them have an impact on the growth of the child. A good behavior should be, it should be promoted, and good behavior should be rewarded, whereas a bad behavior should be curtailed or stopped. So how the parents take care of the children, what sort of awareness they have of their own children, and how they counsel their children, how they provide guidance, and what sort of attitude they have. All these will be realized in the child later when he becomes a good citizen. And we find that the favorable attitude towards authority also develops in the children, provided the authority tries to take care of them. Here in this case, it is the parents. We find if the child is not provided proper sort of support during these stages, he may become a disruptive individual, in the sense he does not develop healthy human relationships, nor does he develop respect towards authority, nor is he able to reciprocate good relationships, nor is he able to become emotionally stable. And we find that a healthy individual's basis is formed during the childhood, where he develops all the sort of social skills required, the emotional well-being, as well as the knowledge, how he forms knowledge about society, and also his moral well-being or his moral tenets are also formed during this stage. So fostering knowledge as well as nurturing is very important. The families or the parents or the caregivers have to provide them security, safety, and provide them with good health, and they have medical care. And all these aspects should be developed during one's childhood. The next stage will be dealing to a certain extent, will be with the stage of adolescence. We'll be talking about the puberty stage in detail, followed by adolescence in the next class. So let's stop here. I request you to go through the lessons of puberty and adolescence, so we'll have a quick review on them. Thank you for listening to me.
Okay, thank you.